Now, as of today, at international airports across the European Union, travellers will be allowed from outside of the continent, but only in 15 countries. And it's countries where European health experts have looked at the COVID-19 transmission rate to determine that it's safe for people to arrive. So where are they? Well, there's a 3 colour-coded system. These countries behind me in green, that's where citizens who live in those countries will be allowed to visit the European Union. So we've got countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada. A little bit closer to home here, we've got Morocco and Algeria. All of those people will be allowed to visit the European Union. Some countries in red, countries where the transmission rate is high. Russia, of course, Brazil, most notably the US did not make that list of green countries, so residents there can't visit the European Union. You'll have noticed there's 2 countries in amber. China first up, where the outbreak first originated. Well, the EU have said, OK, citizens who live in China can visit the European Union, but only if European citizens can visit China as well. That deal hasn't quite been worked out yet. When we hear from Beijing, we'll let you know. But also, the UK has been designated amber. Of course, the UK left the European Union earlier this year, so they're being treated as a slightly different case, but until the end of the transition period, citizens in the UK are being treated the same as the rest of Europe, so it's effectively a green country as well. Let's go to Brussels, though, to unpack this a little bit more and find out. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is on the scene there for us. Darren, good morning to you. This list has been so widely anticipated, which countries where people will be able to travel to Europe. But how much weight does it actually hold? Is it binding? Is it just advice from the EU? How does it work?
Yeah, it's been quite a difficult and in many ways, Rosie, torturous process to try and get this list agreed to by European Union countries. It involved, of course, politics and economics, but public health clearly too. There are those that wanted to play it safe, countries like Germany and Spain, for example, who weren't necessarily terribly keen to rush to this decision. And then there were others like Greece and Portugal that are very, very dependent on the tourism industry. I think 25% of Greece's economy comes from tourism, who are very keen to try and attract tourists from overseas this summer. To address your question, though, ultimately, this is a decision up to member states. The EU, when it talks about its external border, in theory, it doesn't actually really exist. Member states control their borders. What the European Union wanted to do, though, is to have coordination so that member states would agree on a list, which we now have, of 15 countries. But ultimately, of course, it will then be up to those countries to implement that list and indeed to potentially change it if things need to change in the future.
But just a little bit more of the logistics, Darren, if we could. So people in Australia can now visit the European Union, but does that mean residents in the EU can go to Australia? Is it sort of one way, works both ways?
Yeah, essentially it is. That's the idea behind it, and that's why, of course, the kind of example of China is so interesting, because ultimately it has decided at the moment not necessarily to offer reciprocity, and so that means that until that happens, the EU are not allowing Chinese visitors. So clearly, yes, it has to work both ways. That's one of the kind of criteria for it going forward. But of course, these things change, and you know what, as I say, it is fundamentally up to member states. Look, for example, at the internal borders in the EU, Rosie. You know, the Czech Republic at the moment, for example, is not allowing in Swedish or Portuguese visitors because of high infection rates. Things are likely to change, but this is a start, a sign that things are getting back to normal, a sign that Europe is starting to reopen again, a bit slowly and with some caution, but for some, potentially, a summer holiday might be on the way.
Darren, thank you very much. Our political editor there in Brussels.